in my paper, I examined poems by Nicosia Cyprus adjacent to his collection Ionian Miller, namely Aeschylus, son of Euphorion's Valor, and The Glasswork of the Sultans. Both these poems are, in Charalambidis' terms, historiomythi, in which, one way or another, Aeschylus plays a major part. The poems adopt a technique common in Charalambidis of the post-1995 period. Specifically, they form part of a series of contrarian exchanges with major authorities of the Greek past, poets or other. This technique assimilates the time-honored Greek tradition of philosophical, indeed agonistic dialogue. Also, however, in its systematic, designedly pedestrian rationalism, it relates further to the quasi-essayist poetic style that Charalambidis first establishes in Dokimi, a collection whose title, among other connotations, also alludes to the word Dokimion, essay. The formula in each occasion is simple. What the traditional authority has to say about a specific matter is treated with respectful disagreement and is methodically refuted. The new proposal that emerges from the exchange reinterprets and thus renovates tradition. In this peculiar poetic refutatio, the antagonist may be explicitly identified by name and the contrarian attitude may be direct. Just as commonly, however, the exchange may be indirect and the antagonist can remain unnamed, being very easy to infer. Both poems that concern me here today belong to the second category. Charalambidis' antagonists are too obvious to name. In the first case, it is Constantine Kavafi and his emblematic young men of Sidon 400 AD. In the second case, it is Aeschylus and his Persians, with Herodotus also in the background, and not without the distinct, if tacit, presence of Sepphoris. In other words, Aeschylus, son of Euphorion's Valor, is an intertextual dialogue about the ancient playwright, which morphs into a poem of poetics, Poietikis. On the contrary, at first glance at least, the Glasswork of the Sultans is a direct engagement with the ancient authority, which, however, is crucially triangulated by the looming presence of a modern interlocutor and a topical, all too painful point of concern. Let us start with Aeschylus, son of Euphorion's Valor. I read the poem in modern Greek. Εσχύλου εφορίωνος αλκίδη. Τώρα μπροστά σε τούτο της σποδότηρας γέλας το μνήμα, χάραγμα εξαφνίζει. Αλκίν δευδόκιμον μαραθώνιον άλσος. Το πράγμα χρήζει μάλλον ερμηνείας, πιο βαθυπλόκαμης και από του μύθου. Διότι εσύ, ο πλήρης εφορίας, έβαλες έργα τέτοια που κανείς δεν απαιτώνησε να αμφισβητήσει. Στο πιο μικρό κλονάρι του σφολιάζει πως στριχιδών του λόγου η τριπλεξία. Και αν ήθελες το μαραθώνιον άλσος να κατατάξεις άθλον πανμακάριστε, γιατί παρέκαμψες τις ναυμαχίες που είχαν στην αριστεία σου μερτικό? Αλλά όμως κράτη, τώρα που το σκέφτομαι, η μνήα του μαραθώνος όλα τα άλλα συγκεφαλαίωσε και μάλιστα καθάρισε τις τέχνης της ροές. Η μνήα του μαραθώνος μάλαξε την ψυχή σου και την έπλασε με τρόπον ώστε να γεννείς αυτόχθον της ανδριάς σου. Μην επιζητώντας την αρετή στους ουρανούς. Υπάρχει στου νου την ευδοκίνηση, στο άλσος εκείνο που μοιράζει κατά αναλογίαν τα αρώματα, τα χρώματα και τις λατρείες. Προπάντων δε, ως μαραθωνομάχος, γνωρίζεις πόσο λιγοστά χρειάζονται για να ισορροπούν αισθητικά εκείνα που ο μαραθώνας τεχνιέντος αποκρίνει. So, in this poem, the bone of contention is Aeschylus' legacy as immortalized on his funerary epigram in Gela. This legacy is problematized in Kavafi's poem Young Men of Sidon 400 AD. The staging of Charalambidis' poem is obviously different than Kavafi's. Rather than frolicking in a symposium, Charalambidis' poetic persona stands in front of Aeschylus' tomb in Gela. Other than that, the poem sets off in a familiarly Kavafian tone. Charalambidis' persona is just as startled by the confusing statements of the inscription as Kavafi's youths are. This is, of course, a deliberately misleading strategy. Charalambidis' conclusion will be very different, in fact, the exact opposite of Kavafi's. The younger poet ends up validating the merit of the epigram. The sentiment in stanza 2 is entirely Kavafian. The persona loquens is puzzled by the fact that Aeschylus inexplicably failed to mention his most illustrious achievement, that is, of course, his universally admired corpus of tragedies. Stanza 3 retains the same tone, with only a slight differentiation. His tragedies are not the only thing Aeschylus failed to mention. Even his military record is selectively treated, since his involvement in the great naval battles of the day, one of which, in fact, the Battle of Salamis, was immortalized in his Persians, is also omitted. There is a faint pedantry in this stanza, consistent with Charalambidis' aforementioned pseudo-essayist style, which serves the strategy of surprise. Here, the poetic persona analyzes the inscription as if with the clinical accuracy of a scholar, who sees contradiction and lacunae in the surface, rather than, as in the second half, with the insight of a poet who recognizes unity and harmony in the deep structure. The Carafian streak is brought to an abrupt stop in the beginning of the fourth concluding stanza, which transforms the poem unexpectedly into a poem of poetics. Hold on, however. The mention of Marathon, and Marathon alone, is not a mistake after all on Aeschylus' part, but a kind of synecdoche which encapsulates the essence of both his life and his artistic achievements. The operative word here is autochthon, να γεννείς αυτόχθον της Ανδριάσου, with its strong ties to ancient Athenian ideology. Marathon is what makes Aeschylus' valor not only specifically and particularly Athenian, but also earthly, human, real and physical, rather than mystical, metaphysical, divinely inspired, or otherworldly. Unlike Aristophanes' larger-than-life, towering figure, who is disconnected with real people and real life, I'm talking, of course, about Aeschylus' image in the frogs, Charalambidis' Aeschylus is deeply rooted in the earth and made from the stuff of actual human beings. He is simultaneously somebody special, somebody whose mind flourishes, and one of the hoi polloi, the Athenian bravo, Soros. Contrary to the indignation of Cavafis' persona, however, he is proud to be so. His flourishing mind, in association with, and not in separation from, the fragrances and the colors of the Marathonian grove, affords him all the worship that he needs. Above all, propandum, however, for Charalambidis' Aeschylus, Marathon is something more than a shortcut reference to a glorious historical incident that marked his life. It is a capsule of artistic theory. The special Marathonian kind of excellence in art that Charalambidis' Aeschylus achieved is encapsulated by the concluding verses to strike the aesthetic balance in the midst of all that Marathon artfully conceals. At first glance, these verses appear to evoke the kind of naturalism celebrated by Ovid with reference to the archetypal Pygmalion, ars ateolatet arte sua. In fact, though, this may be a misleading impression. What Marathon conceals is not so much the technique behind the artistic product that makes it seem artless and natural, but rather an aesthetic prerequisite of the socio-political order. Moderation, metron, both aesthetics and morality, miden adam, harmonious balance. Mentioning Marathon and Marathon alone, Aeschylus' sepulchre underlines a theme that is integral to our Eumenides Project as well, that the poetics of identity is inseparable from a poetics proper. Aristophanes' construction of Aeschylus in the frogs as the epitome of the Marathonomakoi, a golden age lost, is enveloped in deep, undermining irony, the same irony that undercuts Vidios' rose in the clouds and the calls of old men in the Aconians. Aristophanes' Marathonomakoi are respectable but obsolete relics of a bygone time. Charalambidis reinvents Aeschylus as the proponent of a true and genuine classicism, cleansed of any negative associations and deeply associated with an understanding of virtue, personal as well as artistic, as participation in, not detachment from, historical time. Above all, Aeschylus' Andria in Charalambidis is relieved from the ideological discourses of late 15th century Athens, idealizing a universal poetological exemplum instead. The true poet needs to be historically engaged. He cannot afford to extricate himself from the workings of history and the practical aspects of life, detach himself from the ground, looking for self-validation in the heavens. A true poet is ineludibly a poet of his times, a man of his people, a grain of his own earth, an autochthon of his valor. As Charalambidis himself phrased it to me, περλίτσερας, το τελικό συμπέρασμα είναι, για να κάνει ο ποιητής αληθινή τέχνη, πρέπει να είναι ανδρείος με την αρχαία του όρου σημασία που εμπεριείχε και την έννοια της αρετής. Ο ποιητής οφείλει να αγγίζει τη ζωή στην πρακτική της όψη και να δοκιμάζει την δική του δύναμη στο ισοζύγιασμά του με τα δρόμενα της ιστορίας. Let us now turn to the other, slightly more complicated point, the glasswork of the Sultans, η αλλουργία των Σουλτάνων. Ο Xerxes, ο πολυμαθής, λέγουν τα κροτήρια του, θέλησε με το πλήρωμα του χρόνου να μελετήσει στο πρωτότυπο τους Έλληνες. Το πρώτο βήμα του ήταν να φορέσει τη θάλασσα, τον πόντο, στα καράβια του, να της φορέσει μια προβιά στεριάς που να την αυλακώνουν ερυθροί τροχοί σφυρίλατοι, διάστικτοι εκλίδων τιμίων, Ίασπης, Αχάτης, Σμάλτων. Ο ίστρος του χρυσού περικαλύπτει τον ήλιο του Μεγάλου Βασιλέως, αρρύθμιτων λαών της αχανούς ψυχής, από τον Νείλο, τον Ινδό και τις ακτές του Αιγαίου, της Αραβίας και Ευξήνου και Ελισπόντου, θάλατα, την ανυπότακτη έβαλε να αλυσοδέσουν. Τη γύμνωσε ως τον αφαλό και τη μαστίγωσε με ποθοπλάντακτη έξαρση. Τους άχραντους χύνοντας λόγους από κούπα. Οι Έλληνες που δεν καταλαβαίνουν από θυσίες γυαλιού και υπέροχα έργα, τον παρεξήγησαν καθίβριν, καθ' υπέρβαση του τραγικού τους μέτρου. Και διετείνοντος στα κύλα των θεάτρων τους, πως τάχα εμείς, εγώ τους Έλληνες, δεν είμαστε υποταγμένοι δούλοι κανενός. Καθένας από εμάς και μια ιστορία. Δυο να μονιάσουν δεν μπορούν, καντρείς να μπολιαστούν από το μελίσι του ουρανού, γιατί εμάς τους Έλληνες μας έκανε ο Ζεύς ελεύθερους, καθένας και μια πόλη. Διάκη μας και οδηγός μας πάντα, το άτομο που μέσα μας χωριάζει. Και οι χωροί μας γεννιούνται από το χρόνημα της αρετής που λέγει το πρέπον, καθενός ξεχωριστά. Οι Έλληνες λοιπόν που δεν καταλαβαίνουν πως άλλον ήλιο, άλλον κόσμο έχουν οι Πέρσες, άλλη γεύση των πραγμάτων, αφού εκείνοι παίρνουν ένα πάτηρο με χνάρι κομμωδία στα Αριστοφάνη και με αυτόν τυλίγουνε τις φιάλες τους. Θαρούν, ξεκουβαριάζεται στα μάτια τους μια μάζα βαρβάρων. Δεν κοιτάνε το διάκοσμο, τα κτιελοδοχεία για την απόχρεμψη, το χρώμα τέλος πάντων του γυαλιού και την κομψότητα του σχήματός του. Σύνδειξη και περίχυση και οξύδιο του αργύρου, σπυροειδείς νευρώσεις και χυτεύσεις, σε μήτρα που απορρόφησε τα μυστικά τεχνογνωσίας αιώνων, δεν κοιτάνε οι Έλληνες τη διαμόρφωση της γυαλόμαζας και σίγουροι, όπως πάντα, κατακρίνουν. The glasswork of the Sultans provides another case of contrarian dialogue with an authority of the past. In the previous poem, Charalambidis clashed with Gaddafi vis-à-vis Aeschylus' legacy. Here, on the face of it, he counters Aeschylus himself and his orientalizing construction of Xerxes and the Persians in the homonymous tragedy. The primacy of Aeschylus as the interlocutor of this poem over, say, Herodotus Book 7 is established obliquely through the allusion to hubris and to the Greek tragic measure. It is proposed much more decisively through the caveats of their theatres and, of course, the citation of Persians 230 to 245 that follows. Και διετείνοντος τα κύλα των θεάτρων τους, πως τάχα εμείς λόγω τους Έλληνες, this of course alludes to ούτινος δούλη και έκλεινε φωτός, ουδυπήκορη. Charalambidis' poetic strategy in the glasswork of the Sultans is comparable to that of the previous work we analyzed. The first half of the composition conveys the misleading impression that the modern poem is following along the tracks of its ancient interlocutor. But then, suddenly and unexpectedly, a single word, in this case, the word achrandos, signals a dramatic change of direction towards the complete refutation of the ancient authority. To that effect, in lines 1 to 18, Xerxes' image is entirely Aeschylean. He is the bombastic, arrogant leader of the Persians who dares to chain and lash the infinite sea, which he considers another one of his subjects. those countless peoples of the Nile, the Indus, and the coasts of the Aegean, Arabia, the Euxine, and the Hellespont. One readily remembers Aeschylus' long catalogues here, whom he feels free to stuff into his ships. Even his caps, the subversive focal point of the poem's second half, are still mere tokens of ridiculous conceit, celebrating sycophantically his royal erudition. The extravagant luxury of the fleece of land with which he clothes the sea is not yet the positively charged symbol of otherness it becomes later in the poem. It is exactly what Plutos is in Aeschylus' Persians, as opposed to that measured blend of material prosperity and God-fearing acceptance of human limits, which Aeschylus calls Orthos. Plutos, in the hands of Aeschylean Xerxes, is an expression of hubristic human vanity, bound to incur human divine wrath, theon thon. In fact, the fleece of land, with its red rod wheels studded with precious stones, reminds one strongly of the famous Armamaxa, which features prominently, most probably in absentia, and surely as a symbol of the disgraceful hubris that caused the defeats in the exodus of Persians. In the first half of the poem, the effusion of gold is such as to cover the son of the empire through and through. The king himself, virtually blinded by his own ostentatious inanity, is nothing but a perverted sadist who lashes out at the sea, overcome by torturous erotic excitement. Τη γύμνωσε ως τον αφαλό και τη μαστίγωσε με ποθοπλάνταχτη έξαση. All this starts to change suddenly in line 18, when Xerxes, soon after his unseemly lashing of the sea, pours libations into it from a cup. Charalambidis' wording is significant here. At this point, the poem's direction changes rapidly, if at first indistinctly, through the semantics of a single word. In the Greek original, in Charalambidis' original, Xerxes pours achrandus lobus από κούπα. Achrandos, better translated perhaps as unsullied or unblemished, rather than with economies unadulterated, is often associated with Holy Mary, Achrandos Parthenos, and generally with all that is pure and true. What is unsullied or unadulterated here, of course, as it soon turns out, are not Xerxes' words, far from it, but the cup itself, the glasswork on which the rest of the poem will focus insistently. The hypalagi has a strong ironical force. In the next stanza, this Asian glasswork is initially called hyperongon ergon, extravagant work. This ambiguous qualification, coupled with the just as equivocal expression that follows, καθύβριν, καθυπέρβαση του τραγικού τους μέτρου, gives the impression that the Aeschylean rhetoric continues, not least because these expressions reproduce the Persians' insistent exploitation of the preposition hyper, to express excess. In fact, the Aeschylean streak is now dropped. The Greek misinterprets, they fail to understand. Connolly's translation, misinterpreted as hubris, as a transgression of their tragic measure, obscures, I think, the subtle ambiguity of Charalambidis' original. The Greeks indeed consider Xerxes' act as hubris, but their own cocky self-assurance and hasty judgment, και σίγουροι όπως πάντα κατακρίνουν, is also a violation of their own proper measure. This initiates a startling turnaround in the poetic commentary. In what follows, Charalambidis shakes the very fundaments of Aeschylus' rhetoric in the Persians. He turns the Aeschylean political dynamics completely on its head. What in the Persians was the quintessence of Greek superiority over the Persians, what made the Greeks powerful and invincible against all the odds, namely Athenian democracy, Greek political independence, eleftheria and parrhesia, here becomes their Achilles heel. Indeed, the Greeks are nobody's subjugated slaves, but this also translates into a pernicious inability to live in concord with one another. Indeed, Zeus has made them free, but too free. In fact, each one of them is an independent city. They may not be a massa barbarum like the Persians, but their individuality, so strongly highlighted as the erkos of their land by Aeschylus' messenger, is in Charalambidis a severe predicament. The Greeks do retain a sense of virtue dictating moral action, but each one of them has a different sense of what is right. And our dances are born from the sense of virtue that dictates the duty of each one separately. However, the Greeks' greatest plight by far is their unwillingness to incorporate the other into their own view of the world. The second half of the poem thus places one version of hubristic arrogance, Xerxes, against another, the Greeks. On the one hand, the great king's excess; on the other hand, the Greeks' facile, supercilious conviction of superiority, which, conditioned by insularity and narcissism, betrays nothing but their inability to understand the workings and the players of history. And this is where Cyprus comes in. I will get to that in a few moments. This war, the Persian Wars, is a clash of egotisms. The second part of the poem seems to imply not a battle between virtue and vice, as in the Persians, more or less. In such, it may well nigh be a mere coincidence that Xerxes, not the Greeks, comes off the worse. The history or mythical crust of Charalambidis' poem begins to crack, revealing the topical comment lurking beneath. The clue hides in the poem's very title, the glasswork of the Sultans. What on earth do the Sultans have to do with a poem about Aeschylus and Salamis, apart from the fact that the Ottomans too excelled in glasswork? To answer this question, one needs briefly to recap a notion that Charalambidis calls the tragic feeling, and which is intrinsic to his perception of Cypriot Greekness. Occasionally, Charalambidis once said in a lecture he delivered at the Open University of Cyprus, I compare my own way of writing with that of my colleagues from Greece. They tell me sometimes, you Kyriakos come from a completely different world. For Cyprus is indeed a different world. It has the stamp of tragedy, and this has given the island a different perspective, a different potential for interpreting the world, the tragic feeling. This tragic feeling underpins both Charalambidis' perception of history and his reception of Greek tragic drama. The seed of historiomythical thinking was present in Charalambidis since his poetic preludes. However, it was in the three pivotal Cyprus-themed collections he published after the Turkish invasion of 1974, Coast of the Achaeans, Famagusta Reigning City, and the Dome, that the Greek Cypriot poet's historical consciousness and his poetic reuse of collective memory consolidated into a grand narrative about the nature and fate of mankind in general, and about what he perceives as the tragic destiny of his native islands in particular. In a nutshell, into a personal historical vision of the tragic, determined by the historical fate of Cyprus, but intended to be universal in its applications. In interviews given in 2008 and 2009, the poet commented on this vision as follows. My poetry shows on its body the stigmata of the modern tragedy of Cyprus, namely the Turkish invasion and the occupation of a large part of the island, which completely upset the order of things and made me redefine poetry as an essence and as a way of life. Through the experience of invasion and occupation, I was graced with the opportunity to understand that in the end it is nothing short of a miracle and a blessing for a people to be able to contain the memory of all their defining elements in the circumscribed space of tragedy. However, unless one incorporates the sense of the tragic into an ecumenical understanding of history, unless one perceives of existence as something deep and fathomless, the character of one's art ends up being merely descriptive and consumerist. The essence of art is that it encompasses a much wider space than its temporal framework. In this extract, Charalambidis views the Turkish invasion as an instance of cosmic outrage and imbalance, an upset of the order of things, much like Xerxes' invasion of Greece in the glasswork of the Sultans, or like the crucifixion of Christ by a brash and unwitting humanity, the stigmata. Yet for the poet, like all tragedy, this particular outrage too is or can be eventually cathartic, both in the sense of broadening one's moral horizons and of cleansing one's soul from those very failings which contributed to the tragedy in the first place. Upsetting the order of things is a deliberately ambivalent phrase, for such an upset, apart from destroying one's universe, can also jolt one's dormant sensibility and cocksure morality into a painful yet salutary awakening. In the Greek, and generally the Western imaginary, the archetype of invasion, which is simultaneously the paradigmatic moment of cosmic disturbance, is of course none other than Xerxes' hubristic crossing into Greece, as depicted in Aeschylus' Persians. In the modern Greek imaginary, more specifically, Sepphoris, in his poem Salamis of Cyprus, written in 1953 with reference to the British and their refusal to grant Cyprus enosis with Greece, monumentalized the enchainment of the Hellespont's. In Sepphoris, a token of the tragically misguided belief that power can justify any transgression and outrage, as a metaphor for the historical injustice done to Cyprus by various foreign oppressors. This poem, as well as the whole Cyprus-themed collection in which it is included, Love Book 3, was epochal for Greek Cypriots, being the springboard of most post-colonial Greek Cypriot poetry of the national stripe. It provided a handy blueprint for visualizing the interconnection of history and tragedy as regards the island's historical fate. Sepphoris' poem provided, and this is the irony of it, an accommodating vision of constant historical insults added to interminable historical injuries, which underscores most of Greek Cypriot education, foreign policy, and wider Weltanschauung in the period after independence, especially after 1974. This reassuring discourse was formulated as a rule in obstinate self-insulation from opposing viewpoints, and in persistent refusal to acknowledge that somewhere there may be, to quote from Charalambidis' poem, a different sun, a different world, a different taste of things. The classic Cypriot Ego engine. In 2003, exactly 50 years after Sepphoris' Salamis of Cyprus, and about 3 decades after the Turkish invasion, that is in a period when nationalism was increasingly seen as a blind ally, Charalambidis, in his common habit of entering into this deconstructive dialogue with his poetic ancestors, tackles the Xerxes episode at palpable variance with Sepphoris. Facing Xerxes, Charalambidis' Greeks fail to understand the tragic essence of the experience. On top of that, their quick judgment of the barbarian is narcissistic and short-sighted. In one word, it is itself hubristic. Their viewpoint remains obstinately confined to their own limited understanding of the complexity of history and their conveniently Manichaeistic Orientalism, Maza Varvara. Their unexamined, obtuse sense of superiority blinds them to their own faints and flaws. History teaches that soon after the Medica, those very flaws would gradually prove the Greeks' undoing. This reaction furnishes indeed an effective objective correlative to the Cypriot condition as perceived by Charalambidis. It should be stressed that in giving the Xerxes episode such a starkly anti-Sephoric, ironical twist, Charalambidis is not, despite appearances, in total disconnect with Aeschylus. For the Greek Cypriot poet, as evidenced by the interview extracts cited above, the 20th century Cypriot experience is a historical convergence whose ingredients were there since the time of Salamis. I am referring to that uneasy but potentially productive encounter of a parodial, self-assured microcosm with an apocalyptic event, which challenged the narcissism of that microcosm, or should have done so. The ancient Greeks fought the apocalypse, but Aeschylus' reading of that victory is less one-sided, less panegyric than it looks. According to some scholars at least, what makes the Persians a genuine tragedy, and not, for example, a definition, is that the ending of Aeschylus' play is more open than it appears at first sight. In fact, some argue, people like David Rosenblum or Edith Hall, Xerxes' fate could function as a cautionary tale for Athens itself, which in 472 BC was already displaying symptoms of imperialistic arrogance, failing to understand, in effect, the Xerxes experience. with this oblique irony and with his empathetic power, whereby the suffering of war and death becomes a universal human destiny rather than just the fate of the vanquished, Aeschylus paradoxically transcends the notion of the Asian other as an inhuman and inferior adversary, just as he abets in constructing it. In 2003, exactly 50 years, I repeat, after Salamis of Cyprus and almost 30 after the Turkish invasion, Charalambidis, always a national poet, supersedes Seferis' self-righteous indignation to recapture Aeschylus' pained, reflective, inclusive humanity. It should be clear that although Charalambidis' interlocutor here appears to be Aeschylus himself, it is still, as in our first poem, Aeschylus' legacy, its interpretation and appropriation, which provides the bone of contention. For Charalambidis, this is a legacy of historical introspection and of a tragic feeling. The Turkish invasion as a tragedy, if approached with cognizance, could afford Greek Cypriots the opportunity of Turkish purgation, that is to say, the chance to overcome the bounds of ephemeral time in order to grasp the tragic principle of human existence at large, and to surpass the narrow confines of their own insularity. In 2003, however, Charalambidis seems to be implying this is still a desideratum. To conclude, the two examples analysed here should suffice to show that Kyriakos Charalambidis' contrarian debates with authorities of the distant or more recent Greek past are intricate, polyphonic intertextual engagements which in themselves perform the poet's understanding of tradition not as a straightforward, linear, Roma says, univalent patrimony, but as an agon that implicates Greek language and culture in their dynamic diachronism. The dynamism, the tortuous dialogism that's always inherent in Charalambidis' reception processes is betokened by the fact that in both our poems, the main antagonist is not so much the ancient voice on the surface, Aeschylus, as a more oblique, modern one that triangulates it. At the end of the day, it's never so much about Aeschylus as about what is done with him. And this constantly open, never-ending deliberation cannot be anything but a contrarian debate, anything but an eroikos antilogos with the various ambiguous Eumenides of the past. Thank you very much.